It started quietly, almost too quietly. For someone whose voice had echoed through television screens, live streams, and church pulpits for decades, Joni Lamb's sudden retreat from the spotlight was more than noticeable. It was unsettling. Followers began whispering about it in comment sections. A missing weekly segment here, a skipped social media post there, and then silence. For weeks, even months, Joni's once vibrant online presence, the faith-filled messages, the family snapshots, the behind-the-scenes glimpses into her life at Daystar, was reduced to a trickle. Fans who were used to daily affirmations and spirited broadcasts began to wonder, where is she? At first, it was easy to chalk it up to rest. After all, Lamb had weathered a whirlwind in recent years, losing her husband Marcus in 2021, leading one of the most prominent Christian networks through a storm of public scrutiny, and navigating the pandemic-era controversies that saw Daystar's name in headlines more than once. Who wouldn't need a break after all that? But this time, something felt different. This wasn't the kind of absence you could explain away with a quiet sabbatical or a family vacation. Even among Daystar loyalists, there was a growing unease. Some viewers began recording timestamps of her last known appearances, while others speculated in Facebook groups and evangelical forums about internal shakeups at the network. Theories ranged from health concerns to theological disagreements, but underneath them all was a more personal, more uncomfortable question. Was Joni being pushed out of her own empire? And perhaps the most curious part? Daystar itself wasn't saying much. The network continued with its programming like business as usual, offering no official statement, no soft explanation, no attempt to fill the gap she left behind. That absence became louder than words, and it left an open space for the rumor mill to churn freely. Joni's silence became its own kind of statement. It didn't scream, but it echoed, and people were listening. The woman who helped build a billion-dollar Christian broadcasting brand was suddenly nowhere to be seen. And everyone who'd ever followed her journey, whether out of admiration, curiosity, or controversy, was left to ask the same question: what happened to Joni Lamb? When public figures go quiet, the internet gets loud. And in Joni Lamb's case, the noise came fast, and came from everywhere. It started small, a tweet here, a Reddit thread there. But as the weeks passed and her absence became more conspicuous, fans, critics, and digital sleuths started connecting dots, drawing conclusions, and, unsurprisingly, getting messy with it. One viral TikTok, posted by a self-proclaimed ex-evangelical watchdog, claimed there were massive power shifts happening behind the scenes at Daystar. The clip zoomed in on an empty chair during a live broadcast, then flashed to a clip of Joni's son Jonathan Lamb speaking solo, followed by a montage of her past Instagram posts with cryptic captions like, "Trust what God is doing, even when you don't understand." That TikTok racked up over 3 million views in less than 48 hours. Then came the podcast crowd. A popular Christian culture commentator dropped a 45-minute episode titled "The Disappearing of Joni Lamb: What Daystar Isn't Saying," and it lit a match under a growing narrative. Joni wasn't on a break. She was being edged out. Others ran with a more scandalous angle, citing whispers of disagreements over Daystar's messaging, new leadership power plays, or even the lingering legal and financial tensions left in the wake of Marcus Lamb's death. And while the theories ranged from plausible to downright conspiratorial, one thing was clear: the audience was invested. Screenshots were circulating. Clips were being dissected frame by frame. Devoted viewers who once saw Joni as a pillar of spiritual leadership were now zooming in on her jewelry choices, hair changes, and background decor for clues. One fan posted a 10-slide Instagram story breakdown titled, "Joni's Timeline: The Disappearance No One's Talking About," complete with side-by-side shots showing her slowly vanishing from public-facing roles over a 6-month span. Still, the wildest rumors weren't just about why she disappeared, but who might have had something to gain from it. Names were being tossed around. Was this a quiet coup, a forced rebranding effort, or something more personal, perhaps a family rift? The silence from Daystar and the absence of any official comment only fueled the fire. Every unanswered question felt like a confirmation. And then, just when speculation hit a fever pitch, Joni herself reemerged, but not with the polished, carefully curated tone people were expecting. Her return wasn't just a statement. It was a reckoning. It didn't come through a press release. It wasn't a carefully staged comeback on Daystar. There was no PR team hovering in the wings. Instead, Joni Lamb returned to the public eye in the rawest, most unexpected way, a late-night Instagram live that felt less like a media strategy and more like a woman at her breaking point. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from a flood of emotion she clearly hadn't released until that moment. Framed against a dimly lit backdrop that looked more like a private prayer room than a studio, she began with just one sentence. "I wasn't going to speak, but silence has a price." And just like that, the internet stopped scrolling. Over the next 30 minutes, Joni shared what sounded like a story still unraveling in real time. She didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. But what she did say painted a picture of someone feeling pushed out, sidelined, and spiritually tested by people she once called family, both in blood and in faith. "I've always believed in transparency," she said, pausing often to steady her voice. "But sometimes, when you're the one holding everything together, no one stops to ask how you're really doing." She spoke of exhaustion, of being pulled in too many directions, of navigating grief without space to grieve. And most pointedly, she spoke of a shift in the atmosphere at Daystar, one that made her question not just her role, but her place. It wasn't just emotional, it was calculated in its vulnerability. She quoted scripture, referenced her late husband Marcus, and even hinted at internal disagreements over the network's direction in a post-COVID, post-Marcus era. "Sometimes, when leadership changes, so do the values," she said quietly, adding, "and that's when you have to ask, do I stay silent to keep the peace? Or do I stand for what I know is right, even if it costs me everything?" For longtime viewers, it was a gut punch. For insiders, it was a warning shot. For critics, it was confirmation. The live stream ended without fanfare. No goodbye, no promises of return, just a lingering quote. "This isn't the end of my voice. It's the beginning of my truth." Within minutes, #Joni Lamb was trending. The clip was reposted, transcribed, and picked apart across every platform imaginable. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Past Daystar clips were dragged back up for analysis. And perhaps most telling, her name was suddenly everywhere, except on Daystar's official channels. The silence had finally broken. But the real shock? What she didn't say might have been louder than what she did. The moment Joni Lamb hit, and on that live stream, it was as if the Christian media world collectively held its breath, and then exhaled into chaos. In the wake of her emotional reveal, the fallout was swift, layered, and, in some corners, calculated. What had been whispered in back channels was now center stage, and the reactions, well, they told their own story. Within hours, social media flooded with hashtags. #StandWithJoni, #PrayForDaystar, and the far more ominous #WhereWereThey. Fans, former followers, and even faith influencers began choosing sides, some boldly, some quietly, and some with the kind of passive-aggressive Christianese that said everything without saying anything. Her allies were the first to speak up. Some expected, others surprising. Longtime friends like Cindy Jacobs and Dr. Marilyn Hickey posted support almost immediately, praising Joni for her strength in a season of spiritual warfare and calling her a voice we still need. Others, like singer Cece Winans and author Priscilla Shirer, offered more cryptic encouragements, messages about storms, silencing, and spiritual pruning. Nothing direct, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Then came the power players. One of the biggest eyebrow raisers came from TBN's official Instagram, which shared a quote on the cost of authenticity the day after Joni's live stream, without tagging her, but at the peak of the #storm. Industry insiders immediately clocked it as a subtle show of solidarity, or maybe shade, depending on how you read it. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the fallout was the silence, from people closest to the Daystar throne. Jonathan Lamb, Joni's own son, and the presumed heir to the network's leadership, said nothing. No post, no statement, not even a like or a share. His sudden radio silence, especially after weeks of active hosting duties, sparked a whole new wave of speculation. Was this a family rift, a business divide, or both? Even more conspicuous was Daystar's official response, or rather, the complete lack of one. The network continued its programming as if nothing had happened. Joni's name wasn't mentioned. Her absence wasn't explained. It was business as usual, except now the audience knew something was very much not usual. That kind of strategic omission said more than any press release could have. Meanwhile, smaller Christian creators and former Daystar staff began to share their own stories. One former producer, speaking anonymously on a podcast, described a growing tension in the months following Marcus Lamb's death. Another claimed that big decisions were being made behind closed doors, and that Joni had less and less say in the direction of the network she helped build. Even mainstream media caught the scent. A few entertainment outlets ran headlines like "Faith Leaders' Shocking Livestream Hints at Internal Crisis at Daystar" and "Joni Lamb's Disappearance and Reappearance. What's really going on?" The coverage was restrained, but curious. And where curiosity grows, controversy usually follows. But perhaps the most unexpected twist came from Joni herself. Days after the live stream, she reappeared, briefly, on her personal Instagram story, sharing a sunset over water with a single line of text. Sometimes, peace is what you find when the noise clears. No elaboration. No follow-up. Just that. If her original live stream cracked the door open, that post left it swinging. It felt like a quiet assertion of control, a subtle promise that she would be the one telling her story on her terms. And the message landed loud and clear. She wasn't backing down. But the fractures were there. And as more people picked sides, some for loyalty, some for power, and some just to protect their own platforms, one thing was certain: the unity that once defined the Daystar brand was gone. And with every unanswered question, every quiet unfollow, every quote without a name post, the message spread. Joni Lamb wasn't just facing backlash, she was facing a full-blown reckoning. And this wasn't just personal anymore. It was institutional. Joni Lamb's sudden reappearance may have broken the internet silence, but it shattered something far more fragile in the process: the illusion of unity within Daystar's kingdom. For years, the Christian network stood as a pillar of faith-based broadcasting, bold, unyielding, and, until recently, unified under a single mission. But now, beneath the glossy sermons and perfectly lit studios, a new truth has emerged. Daystar isn't just navigating a transition, it's facing a transformation. And Joni Lamb? She's no longer just the face of the network. She's become the heart of a very public reckoning. The question everyone's asking now is, what happens next? Internally, the shakeup is undeniable. Industry insiders have quietly confirmed that Daystar has been undergoing structural changes since Marcus Lamb's passing, reallocating authority, rebranding certain segments, and consolidating decision-making power around a much smaller, younger leadership core. At the center of that, Jonathan Lamb. Groomed for years to take over the family legacy, his ascent appeared seamless on the outside. But Joni's live stream exposed a far murkier reality, one in which she may have been slowly, quietly displaced from the empire she helped build from scratch. What's happening behind the scenes at Daystar has now become a case study in generational leadership struggles, especially within religious media empires. Joni and Marcus didn't just build a network, they built a culture, one that blended televangelism, conservative politics, prosperity gospel, and old-school Southern charisma into a billion-dollar brand. But the digital era has different demands. New audiences, sharper scrutiny, and less patience for anything that smells like dynasty over transparency. For the audience, many of whom grew up with Joni's soft-spoken wisdom and deeply personal testimony, the shift has been jarring. Social media is now teeming with emotional posts that read more like open letters than reactions. "I tuned in for Joni," one viewer wrote. "Without her, Daystar feels hollow." Another put it more bluntly: "You don't just erase the woman who kept the network's heart beating after Marcus died. She was Daystar." And here's the deeper truth. Joni Lamb's absence has created a brand crisis. Whether she's technically still part of the network or not, her perceived exile has caused a growing trust gap between the audience and the institution. When faith-based media thrives on authenticity and moral authority, that kind of fracture isn't just a PR problem, it's existential. But this moment isn't just a crisis for Daystar. It might also be the beginning of Joni's own next chapter. If her live stream taught us anything, it's that she's not done. Not emotionally, not spiritually, and certainly not publicly. The way she spoke, with a mix of wounded vulnerability and steely conviction, sounded less like a goodbye and more like a manifesto. A soft launch of something bigger. A rebrand not as a media executive, but as a survivor of her own story. Whispers are already circulating about what might be next. A memoir? A podcast? A rival network aimed at reclaiming the values she feels Daystar lost? All possibilities are on the table. And in the world of evangelical media, where followings are often more loyal to personalities than platforms, Joni wouldn't be starting from scratch. She'd be taking millions of viewers with her. What's more, this moment could open the door to something entirely new. A candid, no-holds-barred conversation about what happens to women in faith leadership when the spotlight fades, or worse, is wrestled away. Her story is now more than just a headline. It's a symbol. A rallying cry for transparency, for agency, and for resilience in a space that hasn't always made room for female leadership outside of supportive wife narratives. And so the legacy of Joni Lamb is no longer confined to Daystar's legacy. It's becoming something all its own. Whether she rebuilds, reinvents, or simply reclaims her voice, one thing is clear: Joni's story isn't over. In the world of Christian media, where image is everything and silence is often strategic, Joni Lamb's unscripted return didn't just disrupt the narrative. It flipped the script entirely. But here's the thing. For all she said in that emotional live stream, for all she hinted, confessed, and carefully avoided, there was one undeniable undercurrent running beneath it all. She's not done. Not by a long shot. Her final words, "This isn't the end of my voice. It's the beginning of my truth," aren't just poetic. They're strategic. They land like the first line of a memoir, the opening scene of a docuseries, the tagline of something much bigger in the works. And in that silence that followed, her audience was left not with closure, but with questions that only she can answer. What happened behind closed doors at Daystar? Why did her own son go silent? Was this a quiet exile, or the start of a quiet war? And most importantly, what will Joni do with her voice now that she's reclaimed it? There are rumors, of course, talks of a new media venture, unconfirmed reports of a book deal, a growing list of podcast interviews that mysteriously aren't ready for release yet. Even whispers from production insiders that a documentary-style project has been quietly pitched, one that could give Joni the unfiltered, camera-facing final word. Whether those come to pass remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, her story has outgrown the walls of Daystar, and she knows it. In a landscape where redemption arcs dominate streaming queues and public falls often lead to even bigger comebacks, Joni's next move could reshape more than just her reputation. It could redefine how we talk about legacy, leadership, and the price of keeping faith in a world that thrives on control. So for now, the broadcasts roll on. Daystar keeps its schedule. The silence from key players continues. But viewers aren't watching the network the same way anymore. They're watching her, waiting for the next post, the next appearance, the next chapter.